Good morning, survivors, and happy Friday. Today we're going to talk about how to have a difficult conversation. All right, let's get started. But first, do you got your coffee? If you've ever been in a situation where you need to have a difficult conversation with someone, then you know how nerve-wracking it can be. And you know that, as someone who's been abused by a narcissist, you might have a little trouble with being able to stand up for yourself in these situations. Because the fact of the matter is that we've been taught long ago that we don't have anything of value to share with people sometimes, which is false, and that we don't have the right to stand up for ourselves, also false. So today we're going to talk about exactly what you need to do to prepare to have a difficult conversation and how to take it to the next level. All right? So before you go into the conversation, ask yourself some questions. Number one, what is the purpose of this conversation? What do you hope to accomplish here? And number two, what are the issues that you need to specifically state? So, write them down. What would be an ideal outcome? Write down the answer. What do you hope to accomplish in this conversation? For example, if you are dealing with, hiring a new person or getting rid of an old person, someone who wasn't working for you in your life. Let's say you have a housekeeper, and the housekeeper comes over and sits on the couch and watches TV all day and then does the dishes and leaves. Well, maybe that's not really worth your housekeeper money, right? Maybe you want to hire somebody better. So what is the ideal outcome of that situation? Well, you would ideally be able to fire your housekeeper and start with a new one. Ultimately, you want to work out your reason for having the conversation and know very specifically what your purpose is, okay? If you're worried about having the conversation, is it because you're worried that you won't please the person or you'll upset the person? And if that's the case, you need to examine your motivations. Are you having the conversation because it's a necessary conversation? Is there something else you can do to make the conversation easier? Think about that. What assumptions are you making about the conversation? Are you assuming that the person's going to belittle you or intimidate you? Are you afraid to have the conversation because you feel like the person won't hear your message? What issues are you having with that? Are you having the conversation because someone's pushing your buttons? Someone's doing something that's hurting you financially, physically, emotionally, or otherwise? What's the purpose and how is it going to benefit you to have the conversation? Know those things up front. What's your attitude toward the conversation? How do you feel like it should come out? Are you concerned that the person will react to you in a violent or otherwise unsatisfactory way? Is it possible that your own attitude is influencing your perception of the conversation? So if, for example, if you're going to have that conversation with our proverbial housekeeper we discussed, could you go into it with a perception of, getting value for your money? Or could you go into it, can you look at it as a not personal conversation? And understand that you need to know who you're dealing with as far as what your quote-unquote opponent, the person that you're going to say what you need to say to. And you need to understand how to speak to them in a way that they will receive, because otherwise you're just going to waste your breath and your time. Along the same lines, you might want to ask yourself, what might my opponent, so to speak, be thinking about this conversation? What are the needs and fears of the other person involved? Something to consider, all right? And finally, you need to be honest with yourself. What has your contribution been to the situation? So if you're going to have a difficult conversation, you need to understand that all aspects of that conversation before you do it, if you want to do it successfully. To make the conversation successful, the first thing you have to do after you've figured out all the little details ahead of time is you have to open the floor for discussion. So, you could start out by asking a simple question. Like with the housekeeper, you might say, so what do you consider your job to be here at this house? Or if you're dealing with, like, say, a teacher at school who's doing something that you don't like with your child, you might say, what do you consider to be the most important part of your job teaching my child, or whatever, and start to open up the floor for conversation. Next thing you want to do is make sure that you give the other person time to talk. So allow them to have the floor as long as they'd like to, and to say what they need to say. Don't interrupt them except to acknowledge what they're saying, okay? After you have listened to the other person, you need to acknowledge what they've said and validate it as much as you can. Be respectful, but be real. You also need to acknowledge your own defensiveness if it comes up, because it might. the fact of the matter is that we all have, we're human, and all of us have feelings sometimes of being screwed over or getting hurt. And so when we may become defensive during a conversation where we know that someone's not on the same side as us. So if you feel defensive, you can acknowledge that in the conversation and be real about it. So you might say something like, well, I notice I'm becoming defensive, and I think that might be because you just raised your voice and sounded kind of angry. So maybe we could try to keep ourselves on the same page here. Once the other person has said their part, it's time for you to talk. So obviously you want to acknowledge what they've said, like I said, and then you want to explain how they've missed what you need from them, or how your side is different. And you want to do that in as diplomatic a way as possible. So, state what they said and explain why you believe or see it differently than they do. So if the housekeeper says, well, it's my job to keep the house clean, well, then you might point out that they haven't vacuumed the floor in 3 weeks and that mostly they sit on the couch and watch TV. So, you could say, well, I don't really pay you X amount of dollars per week just to do my dishes each day. You know what I mean? The next thing you're going to want to do is move into problem solving mode, okay? So obviously when you start the conversation, you may already have a good outcome in mind, and you should have some outcome in mind, like what you want to happen. But when you get past that point, then you have to know that you have to tell this person in the difficult conversation what the outcome is. So back to our housekeeper example, if you've got a housekeeper that's not doing her job or his job, and they won't, hear you and change their behavior, you might need a new housekeeper, right? So you're going to explain to that person, listen, it's just not working out. We need to move forward, and I'm going to go ahead and hire a new housekeeper or whatever, or I'm going to let you go, or whatever you want to say to the person. You might even ask the person what they see as a viable solution to the problem, because in some cases, maybe they weren't aware of what you were dealing with, or maybe they weren't aware of what the issue was, and so they need someone to help them understand. So if you say to him, or her, what is it that you think would be a proper solution to this issue? They'll tell you what they think and move forward. And at that point, most likely their solution might not be exactly what yours is. So then you have to gently explain, well, this is my solution. So in the case of the housekeeper, if the housekeeper says, well, I guess the solution is that I need to do more work around the house, maybe you give them a week or a period of time to prove that they will do it. Or maybe you say, you know what, I've had enough. It's over. It's still over. Either way, you have to stick to your guns. Nobody likes to have difficult conversations, but sometimes they're necessary and they're just part of life. So what are some ways that you can open up these conversations to make things a little easier for you as you get going? Maybe you could say something like, I've got something I'd like to discuss with you because I think it would help us to work together more effectively. What do you think? Or, I've been concerned about this subject and I'd like to discuss it with you because I think maybe we can make some headway and make our lives easier, both of us. Or maybe you could say something like, hey, can we have a quick conversation? Depending on what you expect to happen and what you want to happen. I mean, I wouldn't give anyone any false hope. So if you're going to fire that proverbial housekeeper, then you shouldn't say, let's figure out if we can continue to work together. But what you could say is, well, I've got some things I want to discuss with you. Do you have a moment? I'd like to hear your side of it. Because you might really want to hear their side of it, but that doesn't mean that your outcome's going to change necessarily. Just don't try to fool yourself into believing that not having the conversation is going to make your life easier, because otherwise it's just going to sit on top of your head and you're never going to get past it, okay? You need to make an effort to have the conversation and get it over with. Rip the Band-Aid right off. All right, I'm going to wrap up for today. I've got lots to do today, and I'm hoping to get 2 more videos out for you guys before the end of the day. So have a wonderful day. I will see you later today for another video. And as always, I really appreciate you that you're here, and I appreciate that you're a part of my life and a part of my day every day. And I truly appreciate that you allow me to be a part of your life and a part of your day every day. All right, thank you so much, guys. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe. I do post daily and usually more than once a day. So I'll talk to you soon.